Complaining is one of those habits that people rarely see as destructive. It feels harmless, even justified. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you complain. Your boss overlooks your effort and you complain. Life throws you another curveball and you find someone to tell. In the moment, it feels like relief, like you've lightened the weight of what you're carrying by sharing it with the world. But the truth is far darker. Every complaint weakens you. Every time you rehearse you aren't just describing the problem, you're deepening your identity as someone who has no power over it. Think about the psychology at play. When you complain, you're telling your brain, I am helpless here. I am the victim. The problem is out there and all I can do is narrate it, and the brain listens. It adapts. It begins to see the world through the lens of helplessness. And before long, it's not just the major tragedies that provoke complaint. It's the little inconveniences, the ordinary frictions of existence. You become trained, almost programmed to find fault, and what you practice daily becomes who you are. A person who complains constantly is practicing weakness, not resilience. Now, there's an important distinction to make. Speaking about a difficulty is not the same as complaining. If you're describing a problem because you want to solve it, you're engaging in responsibility. That's dialogue aimed at clarity and action. But when you repeat the same grievances with no intention of resolution, you're indulging in self-pity. You're trading strength for sympathy. And sympathy, while it might feel good in the moment, is a poor substitute for genuine growth. Over time, complaint erodes character. It makes you brittle because life is hard. It always has been. It's unfair, unpredictable, filled with suffering. That's not a glitch in the system. That is the system. The question is not whether life will hand you burdens. The question is how you will carry them. And here's the thing. The people we admire, the people we remember, are not those who endlessly complained about their lot. They are the ones who bore it with dignity. They are the ones who faced misfortune and refused to let it define them. They turn their silence into strength and their endurance into meaning. Socially, complaint does something corrosive as well. You've met people who always have a grievance. You don't feel drawn to them. You feel drained by them. Their words pull you into the orbit of their bitterness. At first, you might sympathize, but eventually you begin to avoid them because complaint is contagious. It breeds resentment and drags everyone down. Compare that with the person who suffers quietly, who doesn't demand pity, who endures with a kind of quiet nobility. That person commands respect, not because they are free from pain, but because they refuse to weaponize it against others. From a philosophical perspective, complaint is essentially a protest against reality. It's saying life should not be this way, and I will resist it with my words. But reality doesn't bend to complaint. The storm doesn't stop because you curse the sky. The illness doesn't heal because you talk endlessly about its unfairness. Reality is indifferent to your grievances. And so every complaint is wasted energy that could have been directed toward adaptation, toward responsibility, toward genuine strength. This doesn't mean you suppress your pain or pretend everything is fine. That's not strength. That's denial. Strength is acknowledging the pain without letting it rule you. It's saying, yes, this is heavy, but I will carry it anyway. And the remarkable thing is that in carrying it without complaint, you actually grow stronger. You prove to yourself that you are larger than your suffering. You begin to embody the principle that character is forged in fire, not in comfort. There's also a paradox here worth reflecting on. The less you complain, the more people listen when you actually speak about something that matters. Your words carry more weight because they are not diluted by constant grievances. Silence creates contrast. It makes your speech significant. And this too is a kind of strength, communicating not through the noise of complaint, but through the gravity of restraint. So the next time you feel the urge to complain, pause, notice what's happening inside you. Ask yourself, am I reinforcing weakness or am I practicing resilience? Because every complaint is a rehearsal. You are either rehearsing the posture of a victim or the posture of someone who takes responsibility. And over a lifetime, those rehearsals shape who you become. Strength without excuses begins here, with the refusal to indulge in complaint. Not because life isn't painful, not because you are indifferent to hardship, but because you understand that complaint does not lift the burden. It only multiplies it. What lifts the burden is responsibility. What transforms it into meaning is endurance. And what inspires others is not your ability to describe how hard it is, but your ability to carry it without losing your composure. And so the rule is simple. Stop rehearsing weakness. Refuse to let complaint define your voice. Instead, carry your suffering with dignity, because no one remembers the person who cursed the storm. They remember the one who walked through it. Unbroken. One of the subtler ways people undermine themselves is through constant explanation. They feel compelled to justify everything, why they failed, why they succeeded, why they made a particular decision. It's as though they believe their existence is always on trial, and unless they can present the right evidence, the jury of public opinion will convict them of inadequacy. But here's the reality. Over-explaining is not a mark of strength. It is often a confession of insecurity. Think about it in everyday terms. You've likely met people who cannot simply say no. They feel the need to pile reason upon reason, as if without enough justification, their boundaries will be illegitimate. But the truth is, a simple no often carries more authority than a long-winded explanation. Why? Because authority rests on self-possession. When you trust your own decisions, you don't scramble to defend them. You let them stand, and the silence that follows is not weakness, it's gravity. Now, I'm not suggesting that explanations are never necessary in relationships, in work, in community. Communication matters. But there's a difference between communication and justification. Communication is clarity, laying out facts so others can understand. Justification, on the other hand, is rooted in fear. It's a desperate attempt to control how others perceive you. And the more you attempt to control perception, the less control you actually have. Because people sense it. They sense that you are performing for approval rather than standing on conviction. Psychologically, this is tied to a lack of internal security. If you don't trust your own worth, you will lean heavily on the crutch of explanation. You will try to persuade others into granting you validation, but the more you chase it, the further it runs. Respect cannot be begged into existence. It emerges when people see that you do not need their constant approval to act with integrity. The person who is willing to be misunderstood, to endure silence without rushing to justify themselves, is far stronger than the person who endlessly explains. There's also an ironic truth here. The more you explain, the less believable you often become. Consider when someone insists over and over again that they're honest. The repetition doesn't strengthen the claim, it weakens it. Too many words raise suspicion. In contrast, a simple statement spoken once with conviction carries far greater weight. Silence, restraint, brevity, these are the allies of truth. Over-explaining, by contrast, makes truth look desperate. Philosophically, this ties into the question of sovereignty. A sovereign individual does not beg for recognition. They live in alignment with their values, and that alignment itself is explanation enough. They are not careless about misunderstanding, but neither are they enslaved by it. They recognize that other people's interpretations are not fully within their control, and rather than exhausting themselves trying to micromanage perception, they let their life be the explanation. They let consistency do the speaking. Socially, there's an undeniable power in restraint. Imagine two people, one who constantly explains, defends, rationalizes, and one who states their position clearly and then falls silent. Which one do you take more seriously? It's almost always the second. Why? Because silence forces reflection. It unsettles people, it makes them pay attention. In that quiet space, they sense conviction. They sense that you are anchored in something deeper than approval. And that is precisely why restraint commands respect. But let's be clear, choosing not to explain unnecessarily is not arrogance. It's not about dismissing others' concerns or refusing dialogue. It's about discipline. It's about resisting the compulsive urge to hand over your power by over-justifying yourself. It's about knowing when words are useful and when they are simply insecurity in disguise. And this discipline is hard because misunderstanding hurts, criticism stings, silence can feel unbearable. But if you can withstand that discomfort, if you can resist filling every silence with excuses, you grow into someone who is no longer controlled by the need for approval. And that's the real prize here, freedom. Freedom from the exhausting game of constant justification. Freedom from the endless anxiety of perception, freedom to act according to principle rather than fear. That kind of freedom is not loud, it doesn't need to be, it speaks in quiet confidence. It shows itself in the way someone can say less and mean more. So the next time you feel the impulse to explain yourself, pause, ask, is this clarity or is this scarcity or is this insecurity? Am I communicating because the situation requires it, or am I just afraid of being misunderstood? If it's the latter, resist. Let your actions speak. Let your silence carry the weight. Because in the long run, people remember not the one who filled the air with excuses, but the one whose restraint gave every word significance. Strength without excuses. It requires you to build a foundation so firm that you don't need to decorate it with endless explanations. And when you live that way, you will find that your very presence carries authority. Not because you argued for it, but because you embodied it. And so the rule is simple. Speak only when the words add strength. Otherwise, let silence do the explaining. Because nothing is louder in the end than quiet confidence. If you strip away complaint and you strip away the compulsive urge to explain, what you are left with is the raw fact of responsibility. And that, in truth, is the heart of strength, because life doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't slow down because you're tired. It doesn't soften because you think it's unfair. The world delivers its burdens, its harsh, its tragedies, indifferent to what you wanted instead. And you're left with only one choice, to carry it or to collapse under it. Responsibility is the difference between those two paths. To take responsibility is to say, this is my life, and I will bear its weight willingly. Even when the burden is unfair, even when you didn't choose it, even when it feels unbearable. Because refusing responsibility does not make the burden vanish. It only leaves you weaker under its force. When you take it up, however, something paradoxical happens. The weight becomes meaning. It transforms from something that crushes you into something that strengthens you. Responsibility is the alchemy that turns suffering into growth. Psychologically, this is the foundation of resilience. A person who sees themselves as at the mercy of circumstance is fragile. They break under pressure because they believe they cannot control anything. But the person who takes responsibility, even for what they didn't cause, suddenly discovers agency. They realize, I cannot choose everything that happens, but I can choose my response. I can carry myself with dignity, no matter what. And that shift from helplessness to agency is the line between weakness and strength. Philosophically, responsibility is inseparable from freedom. We like to imagine that freedom means doing whatever we want, avoiding burdens, escaping consequences. But that's not freedom, that's indulgence, and indulgence leads to chaos. Real freedom is earned. It comes from discipline, from carrying weight so consistently that you no longer fear it. Responsibility is what anchors freedom in reality. A person who avoids responsibility becomes enslaved to their impulses, their excuses, their endless craving for comfort. But the one who embraces responsibility becomes master of themselves. And let's be honest, responsibility is frightening. It requires you to stop pointing fingers at the world and start asking hard questions of yourself. It requires sacrifice. You have to let go of the comforting illusion that life should be easy, that someone else should fix it for you, that fairness is guaranteed. But if you take that step, if you choose to carry your burden voluntarily, something profound happens. You grow, your character expands, you discover strength you didn't know you had. You see this most clearly in people who have faced terrible hardships. Some collapse into bitterness, convinced life cheated them. Others rise, carrying their suffering not as an excuse but as a responsibility. They become formidable. Formidable. They are not free from pain, but they are free from self-pity. Their presence itself is inspiring because it proves what human beings are capable of when they take responsibility fully. And this is the truth that ties the whole principle together. Complaining weakens you because it rehearses victimhood. Explaining weakens you because it reveals insecurity. Responsibility, on the other hand, strengthens you because it transforms you. It shapes you into someone who is not defined by what happens to them, but by how they respond. That is self-mastery. That is strength without excuses. But let's not romanticize it too much. Responsibility is heavy. It will test you, it will break you down before it builds you up. Yet there is nothing more meaningful you can pursue. Because a life without responsibility may be easier, but it is hollow. Comfort alone cannot sustain the soul. Meaning is what sustains us, and meaning is born from responsibility. So imagine living this way. Imagine a life where you don't complain, where you don't rush to justify yourself, where you accept the burdens laid before you and carry them with dignity. That life will not be easy. It will demand sacrifice, but it will also be powerful. It will make you resilient in ways that comfort never could. And in the end, people will see it, not because you told them, not because you explained it, but because your life itself will be undeniable proof. Strength without excuses is not about appearing tough. It is about becoming real. It is about shouldering responsibility so fully that you no longer need to broadcast your suffering or justify your choices. You live in such a way that your character explains itself. That is self-mastery. That is the kind of life that commands respect not through words, but through presence. So take up your burden willingly. Refuse complaint. Resist the need to explain. Accept responsibility as the path to meaning. Because excuses will fade, but the strength you build will remain. And in the end, it is not the excuses you make that define you. It is the weight you carry, and the way you carry it